Hey everyone, and welcome to my second of 3 videos on this, the Nikon D5100. In the first video we talked about what everything was. In this video we're going to go through how to use this camera in extreme detail. The first thing is this camera is electronic, it's digital, it can do nothing whatsoever without a good battery. So I'm going to show you how to remove that. Pull this lever down towards the far side of the camera and the door will pop open. Push this orange button in and the battery should pop out easily, and it should slide out easily. These batteries it uses the ENEL14, so the Nikon batteries for these tend to still be pretty good. Some of the third-party ones are only okay and tend to swell. If your battery does not slide out of here very easily, check to see if it is swollen by putting it down on a flat surface and seeing if it rocks. Okay. A little bit. This one is okay. It's not swollen, but it is like it's not rocking back and forth. If you could hear it clicking, that would be a sign that it's too swollen to go into your camera safely. It needs to be recycled. Nikon ENEL14 battery. It can only go in one way. If you try to put it in the wrong way, well, that's not going to fit. And actually, that's not going to fit. So, let's see if I put it in. No, still not. Okay. So there really is only one way that I can put it in and have it fit. There we go. Slide it in. One tip about this battery door right here. This little piece of plastic is all that is separating this battery door from working and being broken. So when you close the battery door, push the latch in as though you were going to open it, push the door shut, and then let it close, and that will help preserve the latch on your battery door. Now that we've got a battery in the camera, we can go start taking photos, right? Well, no, we need a lens first. So lens mounting is really easy. White dot. Some lenses have a red dot. Many Nikon lenses use the infinity focus point as the mounting index. Just line them up. Turn it counterclockwise until it clicks into place, and now you've mounted your lens. One quick note about lenses for this. This was designed to use the Nikon G series digital lenses. They're fine. They're good. They're optically fine and good. What's next? Memory card. Memory card. This side. So the memory card installation is pretty simple. Slide the door open. This camera can use SD, SDHC, and XSDXC cards. This is an SDHC card, which you can see right there. It says SDHC on it. And it can use UHS 1 cards. Letter U with the 1 indicates that this is a UHS 1 card. Everything after SDXC, which I think the next one is SDUC, will not work with this. SDXC cards go up to 2 terabytes. A 128 gigabyte card will hold around 5,000 raw files, and those are plenty cheap. One of the nice things about old cameras like this is you can buy a less expensive SD card and it will really outperform what you need. So if you get an SDXC 128 gigabyte card, that will work very well with this. To install the cards, you simply slide them into the port so that the sticker with the text is facing the back of the camera. Push it in, close it, and that is installed the card. And now we are ready, in fact, to go and start taking photos. So let's start talking about what all of the different stuff on this camera is. And the place we're going to start is on the mode dial, so that you know what settings on here do what, and so that you can pick the ones that you want to use. Now I'm going to flip this screen open, and we're going to start right here in auto mode, the green camera. This is full automatic mode, and what this does is the camera will make all the decisions for you. If you have it set to auto ISO, it will pick the ISO. If you have the aperture and the shutter speed, it will pick that for you. You have no control over the flash. It's going to pop up the flash if it wants to and fire it if it wants to. Basically, this is like using your D5100 like a cell phone. It's fine if you have never held a DSLR before and want to get the feel of the layout before you start getting into more complicated photos. But there are better ways to shoot this camera than full auto. One of them being program mode. Program mode is the same as full auto, except that you have control over whether or not the flash pops up. And you can also do what's called shifting. I'm going to hold down the EV compensation button here, and you can see on the screen that numbers are changing in the middle and the bottom. I am currently overexposing my photos by 2.3 stops. I can go up to 5 stops of overexposure. And spoiler alert, you can go to 5 stops of underexposure as well, and you can see in here what that's doing. So you can use this in program mode to force your camera to give you an overexposed image or an underexposed image. Very useful for bracketing, for low-key and high-key photos, things like that. So you cannot do that in full auto, but you can do that in program mode. The S stands for shutter priority mode. And shutter priority mode allows you to select the shutter speed. And you can see it's changing as I select it here. And as I select a different shutter speed, the aperture changes as well. When it blinks, that means there's not enough light for the aperture range available on my lens. So I'm going to have to do a longer shutter speed. Or if I go far enough, there's too much light and my lens can't stop down far enough for that, so I have to give it a little bit less. There we go. Aperture priority mode works in a very similar way, where I control the aperture and the camera will tell me what the shutter speed is going to be to get a proper exposure. So with aperture priority mode, you're not likely to run out of shutter speeds in either direction, so you can always go and get a little, and be pretty well certain that if you use aperture priority, you're going to have a photo turnout. Now I'm going to show you something neat here with aperture priority, and the same exact thing applies to shutter priority. EV button, force overexpose, force underexpose, right? So just like we saw with program, I can use the EV dial to intentionally overexpose or intentionally underexpose in both shutter priority and aperture priority. M stands for full manual. And in full manual, adjusting the command wheel, I can adjust the shutter speed. Holding down the EV comp button, I can adjust the aperture now. So you get in full manual to decide what the shutter speed and aperture will be. If it's correct, which you can see right now because that notch is under the 0, the camera will give you a correct exposure. If it's not correct, the camera will overexpose the photo, or it will drastically underexpose the photo, and it will do what you tell it to regardless of what is actually correct. So with full manual mode, if the photo turns out, congratulations, it's because you did well. If the photo doesn't turn out well, it's your fault. And that's okay, because it's not like you can't just take another one. So the effects will hit right now, and we're going to scroll through them. Basically low key, we'll start here. High key, low key, night vision, come on, color sketch, miniature effect, selective color, silhouette, and back to high key. High key and low key were really easy to understand. High key is a very bright image, way too much light. Your whites will be super white, your blacks will be gray, okay? Low key is exactly the opposite, super dark image. Your blacks will be super dark, your whites will be gray, okay? So those are effects you can do in manual mode. We were talking about super overexposure, super underexposure. Basically, high key and low key is you're going into the effects to tell the camera to do that. So if we go back here, that's high key and low key. Night vision, what that does is that gives you, I believe that's the mode that gives you access to the boost, to the very, very bright setting, okay? Not doing anything in here, except showing off that I'm wearing a very old Steelers shirt. Anyway, that's what night vision is. It's, oh yeah, I have it in my notes, haha. Night vision is where you get the highest ISO 25600 that you can use. So we're going to go next to color sketch. Color sketch is a photo that takes a photo and gives you runs it through a filter to make it look like a color sketch. Miniature effect uses some software to make a photo look like a miniature photo. Selective color will pick out a certain color and make the rest black and white. Silhouette will take your photo and make your subject a silhouette. And then we're back to high key. Here's the thing with all of these effects. Once you do them, you don't get the original photo back. So your best bet, if you're really here to explore photography with this camera and become a better photographer, don't use any of the effects at all. Take a normal photo, edit it in post to get the effect that you want. You'll learn a lot more about your photography and how to take photos that way than by trusting a camera's algorithm to do something for you. We're going to go next here and hammer out the scene modes, because this is another one where we're going to scroll through a bunch of stuff. And so we have sunset, dusk dawn, pet portrait, is that right? Pet portrait, candlelight, blossom, autumn colors, food, night portrait, night landscape, play, what's that one say? Party and indoor, beach and snow, and then we're back to sunset. Okay. All of those, like, there's no mystery in any of them. They're telling you exactly what type of setting that they're meant to be used for. Food will adjust your color space so that food looks more appetizing. Night portrait, the way that that one works is that your subject is sitting in front of you on a bench, right? And then there's a cityscape behind them. There's lights in the city, and it will trigger the flash and use a long exposure so that your subject is illuminated and the lights of the city are illuminated behind them. For that mode, make sure your subject doesn't stand up until you tell them to, and let the whole exposure go before they stand up, because if they stand up in the middle of the exposure after the flash, for instance, then the lights from the city will shine through them. On the image, it won't be a good look. Party indoor, night landscape is a similar thing, but I think it does not turn on the flash. It's just for landscape photos at night, gives you a very long exposure. Party and indoor will give you a high ISO short exposures to capture indoor sort of action-y type shots. Beach and snow will set the camera up to understand that you're going to have a very bright space and expose properly for beach and snow settings. Sunset will add some warmth to the image and give you a proper exposure and color space for sunsets. Dusk and dawn, the same thing, which are gold and blue hour type photos. Probably blue hour with this camera anyway. It will give you a good color space to take photos during those time periods. Pet will basically work like a portrait photo, where what it's going to do is try to isolate your pet's subject from the background, get their face, the pet's face in focus, and then have a nice blurry background. Candlelight will give you a higher ISO, a color space, and sort of the exposure times that are needed to get good candlelight images. Blossom is basically close-up, but I guess specifically for flowers, because there's also a close-up mode on the dial. And then fall colors will help make those fall colors pop by adjusting the color space for the image. So next up here, we have this mode, which is no flash. It's going to disable the flash. Can't even pop it up. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as green auto. So full auto with no flash. This scene mode right here is called portrait. And what this does, this works best at the long end of your camera lens, like this. Like this has a 105 millimeter, right? This is where you want to be using this. If you have the kit 18 to 50, you want to use the 50. What this is going to try to do is give you a depth of field that will have your human subject be in focus and the background be blurry. So use the long end of your lens, and also try to set your subject about 10 feet or so in front of the background, and that will help the camera make the background blurry. Landscape works best at the wide end of your lens, in this case 28 millimeters down here. On the 18 to 55 kit lens, the 18 millimeter range is what you want to use. What this is going to do is give you a small aperture for a deep depth of field. And that deep depth of field, if you put something in the front of your frame and then something in the middle and something in the background, all of that will be in focus. So if you have close-up rocks, a lake that's 30 feet away, and then some mountains that are 2 miles away, all of that will be in focus. So it's for landscape photos. Kids is for kid photos. It's going to try to track quick movements, and this basically isn't going to give you an autofocus of like, hey, something's moving here, and it will know that. Action or sports, what this does is this works best at, again, the longest end of your zoom, and it's going to give you the fastest shutter speed and the smallest, or the largest aperture rather, the smallest depth of field that it can, in the aim of freezing motion. And then of course we have close-up, which is going to again work best at the longer ends of your zoom, And the goal of close-up is to cause the camera to focus at the closest focus point of your lens so that you can take a picture of something which is near the front of your camera lens. And that is everything on the mode dial. I'm going to leave it in manual because I believe that gives me the most options for buttons and stuff, and I'm going to need some of those in just a bit. And this simply starts and stops video recording. So for video, you have to turn on live view, and then you have to turn on your start and stop your video recording. And that's how you do that. Turn off live view because nobody wants to see a Steelers shirt. I understand. It's okay. We have the EV comp we talked a little bit about. Basically allows you to force over and underexpose your images. The info button will turn the screen on and off right here so you can see information about what's going on with your camera. We're going to hop over to the back of the camera and you can see the screen here. The menu button brings up the menus, and we're going to talk about all of these in the third video. The information button allows you to directly adjust things on this screen. Okay, so if I push the information button, now I can use the cross pad to navigate this screen. Okay, so what we have here is your image quality. I go up here, I click OK, and I can switch between different image qualities. RAW plus JPEG that's in B, RAW plus JPEG normal, RAW plus JPEG fine, basic and normal JPEGs, fine JPEGs. If you're using anything Windows 7 or newer, I really hope you're not still using Windows 7, shoot just straight up RAW. It's going to give you the most editing flexibility in post, and also it used to be important to have RAW plus a thumbnail, but Windows 7 and newer displays thumbnails of RAW files from this camera, so you don't need to do that anymore. You can just shoot RAW and have a thumbnail preview. The next one below that is your JPEG quality, but since I'm in RAW, I can't adjust that. I can hit white balance and I can go into auto, tungsten, fluorescent, daylight, flash, cloudy, shaded, or preset. Okay, so all of these are pretty self-explanatory, and whether it's just a matter of the type of lighting you're using. I'm going to go in here to fluorescent and pick that, and so basically tungsten is for orange or warm lighting, it adds blue to your color. Fluorescent is for green lighting, adds magenta. Daylight is color balanced for your full spectrum light. Blue, flash is for xenon light, which is very blue, it adds a lot of amber to your color. Cloudy is for full spectrum that's filtered by clouds, adds a little bit of amber. Shaded is for the shade of buildings, again adds a little bit of amber. And preset will allow you to take a photo of, let's say, a studio space or a tabletop studio that has a white background. And what you can do then is save that into your camera and use the lighting, if you have your lighting being the same every time, to have a consistent white balance. So for instance, you're watching this video right now. I have the same lighting setup for all of these videos. If I were to use that preset, I could set up my lighting, turn it all on, and then have the white balance save so that the camera knew what it needed to do to my raw files or video to have a white to have the white sheet look white. Then what you could do with that lighting, you have your tabletop studio to photograph whatever it is you're going to sell online, or your full room studio to do portrait photos. You have your white balance set. You've saved it in here. You can have any color background you want. And your color space will be consistent across your subjects because you'll have the white balance for that lighting with a white card saved into the camera. And that will give you a lot more consistency in your image results, and it will make your editing in post much simpler. ISO will let me adjust the ISO, 100 up to high 2. And so I can select any of these in here except auto ISO. That's a different setting somewhere else. I think we see that in video 3. But this way I can manually set an ISO. Function is what is the function button going to do, and that's the function button up here on the side. Does it give me access to the quiet shutter setting, quiet shutter release? No, there we go. Does it turn the remote control on or off? Does it do remote control with 2 seconds, remote control with 10 seconds? burst mode or single shot. So basically, when I use the function button, what is it that I want it to do? There we go. So if I press that, it takes me right there. All right, so I'm pushing the function button right now, and let me set this to single shot, and there we go. It just takes it right back and then converts what I'm doing to that mode. So this next one that we're going to bring up is your light meter type, and you have 3 settings: matrix, center weighted, and spot. Okay, so the way that the matrix meter works is that it takes the entire matrix area, which I'm not sure if it's the entire viewfinder area or not, but at any rate, it takes the area of the matrix meter, and it applies depth information and color information to what's coming in through the camera lens to determine the best exposure, shutter speed and aperture, or ISO if you're an auto ISO, for the setting. Center weighted, what that does is take an area in the center of the frame, let's call it about like that size right there, and that's where the majority of your metering information comes from. Usually with Nikons it's like 70 or 75%, something like that, comes from the middle, and then the balance comes from the rest of the frame for your image. So whereas matrix metering is really good for just general shooting, outside, indoors, general scenes, center weighted can also do that very well, but a really good use for center weighted is going to be with portraits. You can put the face of the person you're taking a picture of in the center of the frame. You can use the AEL button, which we'll get to in a second, to lock in the exposure, or have to press your shutter button to lock in the exposure, and then take the photo, and the meter reading will be off of the person's face, with that counting towards the majority of the meter reading. So, downside to center weighted is that if you have something very dark or something very bright in the center of the frame, then what's going to happen is it can throw that off. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I've switched my camera here to center weighted metering, and if we have just a gray card, let's take a look at the peripheries of the frame and what happens to the tabletop as I go from a gray card to a white card. Oh yeah, the tabletop just got a lot darker. So we might be able to guess what's going to happen when I switch here to a black card, or just the black of the back of the camera. That's right, the tabletop became very bright. That's a demonstration that shows how different tones can affect your meter reading in center weighted. And one of the reasons that it's really good as a meter reading for people's faces is because you'll get accurate tones if you balance the meter towards a person's skin tone. Now, the last thing that we have here is spot metering. Spot metering works very much like center weighted, but only for a very tiny area in the middle of the frame. The same exact demonstration that I showed you with the different cards just a moment ago applies to spot metering as well. And if you have a very dark thing in that spot, even if it's very small, it's going to affect the metering for the entire image, because 100% of your meter reading will come from an area about the size of my fingernail. Next here we have ADL, which is advanced dynamic lighting or something like that. Your options are off, low, normal, high, high, extra high, and auto. Just leave this to off. Basically, HDL is sort of like HDR. ADL rather is sort of like HDR. Oh my gosh. ADL is sort of like HDR light, and once you have an image that has all of that post-processing added to it, you can't go back to what you had. Shoot in RAW and edit your RAW files with RAW slider adjustments, and you'll get more out of your images than ADL will be able to give you. You can do better highlight recovery and shadow recovery from RAW with this camera than you can with ADL. Next up is bracket, which is off, A0, 3, 7, 1, 1.3, 1.7, and 2. The numbers are the distance of bracketing. You'll get 3 images. Are we talking about one that's a third under, one that's normal, one that's a third over, 2/3, full stop, 1 1/3, 1 2/3, 2 full stops. under, normal, 2 full stops, over. So the number is how far in each direction your image is going to go from normal when you take a photo. And you can see that right here on this screen. 1 stop under, 1 stop over, 1 stop under, 1 normal, 1 stop over. So let's go back here and go down to 2.0, and you can see 2 under, normal, 2 over. I'm going to show you something very cool here. It's easier to show you at 0.7, right? Because you can see these are a little bit closer together. I'm going to hit the EV comp button and rotate the dial, and you can see it shifts the entire bracket. So if you're looking at a scene and you're like, wow, this is really bright, I know I don't need to have an overexposed bracket, so I want the brightest photo to be what the camera tells me is properly exposed. You can shift this and have both of your bracketed photos be underexposures so that you can have more control over how that bracketed photo turns out. If we go this way, we're going to go into set picture control. All right, so set picture control is another one of these things you just want to leave either at standard or neutral. I honestly couldn't tell you what the difference between these two is. Vivid makes your colors more vivid, monochrome makes it black and white, portrait changes your color space for portraits, and landscape for landscapes. I believe these only affect JPEGs, so even though I have this option here with RAW, but realistically, even if you are shooting JPEGs, leave it in standard or normal and do your color toning in post afterwards, because if you add it to these photos when you take them, you're not going to be able to undo it. This goes into exposure compensation exactly the same as the EV button on the top that we've seen a few times. This is your flash exposure compensation. This will work with select and icon flashes as well as the pop-up flash on your camera. And if we increase this here, you can overclock your pop-up flash or some select and icon flashes to 1 additional stop of light. Or you can underclock it up to 3 stops, which will dim the light that you get from your flash. Okay, so you can have some creative control with your flash lighting here. This is very useful if you're using a flash on top of your camera and bouncing it off of the ceiling, as that will put a little bit more light on the ceiling to bounce back towards your camera. We'll talk about flashes in just a minute. Here is your flash itself, and you can change your different flash modes. Standard flash mode, red eye reduction with slow sync, and rear curtain sync. All right, what do all of these? Flash mode is just standard flash. The camera's going to flash and it's automatically going to pick how much power. Red eye reduction will pulse the flash a few times before it takes the photo to shrink people's pupils and eliminate red eye. Red eye slow sync will do that, but with a longer shutter speed. Slow sync will be a standard flash with a longer shutter speed, and rear curtain will fire the flash when the rear curtain starts its travel versus when the first curtain ends its travel. Okay, if you're new to flashes, here's how they work. This camera's curtain travels up and down, but it's kind of hard for me to do in this setting, so we're going to pretend it travels left to right for a minute. When you take a photo, the curtain opens and it goes all the way to this side. With normal flash mode, when that first curtain opens, the flash triggers, and then after the length of your exposure, the second curtain closes, and that's true up to the 1/200th of a second flash sync speed. 1/200th of a second is the longest time at which the entire sensor is open to light for the flash to be triggered. Okay, and then this one closes. Well, if you do a photo at 1 full second, curtain opens, flash fires, full second passes, second curtain closes, reset. If you're using a flash that does not have high-speed sync, some of the Nikon flashes, I believe, have high-speed sync with this camera. Bit of an asterisk there. I'm not a Nikon flash expert. I don't own any of them, and I am not intimately familiar with how they work, but I think this can use some of that. Anyway, if you don't have a high-speed sync flash, when the curtain opens at 1/1000th of a second, the second curtain is going to follow right behind it, okay? And so when the first curtain finishes its travel, the flash will fire and you'll just have a little strip of illuminated scene over to the side. The rest will be blank, well, actually at the top or bottom. The rest of it will be blank, blocked by the curtain. So what's rear sync? Rear sync, let's say you're taking a 1 second exposure. First curtain opens, sensor is exposed to light for a full second, flash fires, and as soon as that flash is finished firing, the second curtain closes. That's the difference. Standard fires when the first curtain finishes its travel. Rear sync just before the second curtain starts its travel. What that's good for is, let's say you have a 10-second exposure and you have a friend riding a bike through here and they've got reflectors on and there's just enough light to reflect off the reflectors as they ride, and then they get to here and the photo finishes after 10 seconds, flash triggers, friend is illuminated by the flash, lights from the reflectors are trailing off of them. That's an example of how you could use rear curtain flash. If you had standard flash, your friend would be right here, flash would fire, and they'd be facing into all of these lines that are shooting out from their bike. That's the difference. And that's everything on the information menu. So since we talked a little bit about flash just now, let's talk about some pointers on how to use a flash. This camera can connect a flash to the hot shoe like this, okay? The worst possible place you can have a flash is on the hot shoe or in a pop-up right here, because the light will leave the flash in a flat burst, reach your subject, bounce off of them, and back to the lens in this like flat wall of light that will give your subjects red eye, make them look flat and waxy, and just overall give you an unnatural lighting. Why is it unnatural? Well, think about how we see people if we're outside with the sun above us, or at night with street lights above us, or indoors with overhead lights. It's in the name, they're above us. Our brains are wired to see subjects lit from above as being lit normally, naturally, and in a flattering manner. So you want to replicate that with your flash use with this camera. So if you get one of the external flashes, and you get one that can tilt up like this, this will allow you to bounce light off of the ceiling, and you can then replicate natural lighting with a flash on top of your camera. In addition to having a lifting head, some of them can also rotate. This one can't, but rotating would allow you to point the flash at a wall if you don't have a ceiling, okay? And then you could sort of replicate having overhead lighting. And that would give you a lot of flexibility with how you take your photos. The biggest thing that most photographers who use flash struggle with, and something a lot of photographers spend their lives learning, is how to make a flash replicate natural light in a flattering manner. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is the AEL-AFL button. Now, we're actually going to kind of punt this until video 3 because there's a whole section in video 3 about how this functions. The important thing to know right now is that this has different functions based on what you set it up to do in video 3. One of them is to lock your auto exposure, AE lock, or your autofocus, AF lock, or both. So that's what this button does. Next up on the docket, though it's going to be a little bit tricky to see everything on this, is what's in the viewfinder, okay? So this is your focusing area. This area right here is where your image is going to be captured. What you see in here is roughly what's going to be in the photo. These are your autofocus points in here that will light up based on what is in focus in your image. And then down here at the bottom is the information you're going to see in your LCD screen, on your LCD screen in your viewfinder. So we're going to go over what all of these are. This is your focus confirmation dot. If something is going to be in focus, this will light up. This indicates that auto exposure lock is activated. This indicates that flexible program mode has been activated, which, so far as I understand, is basically what I call EV shifting in program mode. Shutter time right here, aperture here, light meter here, works exactly like we saw the light meter work on the display. You can see here there are some blocks above it for your bracketing blocks and things like that. Overexposure on this side, underexposure on this side. That always seems backwards to me. Battery check, flash exposure value compensation. If this is illuminated, then that means that your exposure value is, your flash is being overclocked or underclocked. Exposure value compensation indicates that your shutter speed or aperture will be adjusted to overexpose or underexpose your image. BKT means bracketing is on. ISO auto means you're in automatic ISO mode. This is the number of photos that you have remaining, or the number of photos that you have in buffer. The information in this area will change depending on what you're doing at that exact moment. The K indicates that you have more than 1,000 photos left on your memory card. The O, now the manual is not really quite clear because it kind of just lumps all of these together and says what different things are without being clear on what all of them are. But the O, I believe, indicates that a capture mode, like what we talked about with the different image effects, is activated. This is your flash symbol and indicates that your flash is activated. And then over here is this question mark is your warning indicator, and if that comes on, then something is amiss, and I couldn't tell you exactly what. So this is what's in your viewfinder and all of the information that you can get from it. So the last thing we're going to do in this video is talk about how to take a photo with the D5100. And you've probably pretty much figured it out by now. This camera is designed for you to put all of your settings in ahead of time. Select your mode, select all of your configuration items back here, including things we'll see in the next video in the menu, and then all you have to do is either select the zoom, let the autofocus do its thing, manually focus the lens yourself, and then take a photo by pressing the shutter button. That's that. And that is how simple it is. The whole idea behind this camera is do your setup ahead of time, and then when you go to take the photo, you just have to take it right then, and you're good to go. So that's it for the second video. In the next video, we'll go through the entire menu system and talk about what all of those items are and how they affect your photography.